This book contains up to 4 sides per cassette. Side 1. Ubik by Philip K. Dick. Copyright 1969 by Philip K. Dick, all rights reserved. Narrated by Jeff Halberstadt, this book contains 216 pages on 5 sides. If you would like to skip over any remaining announcements or introductory material, place your cassette player in fast forward until a beep is heard. Stop at that point to hear the beginning of the book. Annotation. Scientists have found a way to preserve bodies in order to bring them back to half-life. Glenn Runsider, concerned about some of his firm's clients, goes to consult with his dead wife Ella, but finds her body taken over by a stronger half-life. When Runsider is killed during an assignment on the moon, his employees hope to put his body into a state of half-life also, but strange happenings make them wonder if he is really dead. Strong Language, 1969. From the book jacket. Glenn Runsider is dead. Or is everybody else? Someone died in an explosion orchestrated by Runsider's business competitors, and indeed it's the kingly Runsider whose funeral is scheduled in Des Moines. But in the meantime, his mourning employees are receiving bewildering and sometimes scatological messages from their boss, and the world around them is warping in ways that suggest that their own time is running out, or already has. About the author. Philip K. Dick was born in Chicago in 1928 and lived most of his life in California. He briefly attended the University of California, but dropped out before completing any classes. In 1952, he began writing professionally and proceeded to write 36 novels and 5 short story collections. He won the Hugo Award for Best Novel in 1962 for The Man in the High Castle, and the John W. Campbell Memorial Award for Best Novel of the Year in 1974 for Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. Philip K. Dick died of heart failure following a stroke on March 2nd, 1982 in Santa Ana, California. Also by Philip K. Dick, The Divine Invasion, A Scanner Darkly, The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, Valis. Dedication for Tony Boucher. Chapter 1. Friends, this is cleanup time, and we're discounting all our silent electric Ubiks by this much money. Yes, we're throwing away the Blue Book, and remember, every Ubik on our lot has been used only as directed. At 3:30 a.m. on the night of June 5th, 1992, the top telepath in the Sol system fell off the map in the offices of Runsider Associates in New York City. That started vidphones ringing. The Runsider organization had lost track of too many of Hollis's highs during the last 2 months. This added disappearance wouldn't do. Mr. Runsider, sorry to bother you. The technician in charge of the night shift at the map room coughed nervously as a massive, sloppy head of Glenn Runsider swam up to fill the vid screen. We got this news from one of our inertials. Let me look. He fiddled with a disarranged stack of tapes from the recorder which monitored incoming messages. Our Miss Dorn reported it. As you may recall, she had followed him to Green River, Utah, where... Sleepily, Runsider grated. Who? I can't keep in mind at all times which inertials are following what people, precog. With his hand he smoothed down his ruffled gray mass of wire-like hair. Skip the rest and tell me which of Hollis' people is missing now. Esto Melipone, the technician said. What? Melipone's gone? You kid me. I not kid you, the technician assured him. Edie Dorn and 2 other inertials followed him to a motel named the Bonds of Erotic Polymorphic Experience, a 60-unit subsurface structure catering to businessmen and their hookers who don't want to be entertained. Edie and her colleagues didn't think he was active, but just to be on the safe side, we had one of our own telepaths, Mr. G.G. Ashwood, go in and read him. Ashwood found a scramble pattern surrounding Melipone's mind, so he couldn't do anything. He therefore went back to Topeka, Kansas, where he's currently scouting a new possibility. Runsider, more awake now, had lit a cigarette. Chin in hand, he sat propped up somberly, smoke drifting across the scanner of his end of the bi-channel circuit. "You're sure that Teep was Melipone? Nobody seems to know what he looks like. He must use a different physiognomic template every month. What about his field?" "We asked Joe Chip to go in there and run tests on the magnitude and minitude of the field being generated there at the Bonds of Erotic Polymorphic Experience Motel. Chip says it registered at its height 68.2 BLR units of telepathic aura, which only Melipone, among all the known telepaths, can produce." The technician finished. "So that's where we stuck Melipone's ident flag on the map. And now it is gone." "Did you look on the floor, behind the map?" "It's gone electronically. The man it represents is no longer on Earth, or, as far as we can make out, on a colony world either." Runsider said, "I'll consult my dead wife." "It's the middle of the night. The moratoriums are closed now." "Not in Switzerland," Runsider said with a grimacing smile, as if some repellent midnight fluid had crept up into his aged throat. "Good eve." Runsider hung up. As owner of the beloved Brethren Moratorium, Herbert Schönheit von Vogelsang, of course, perpetually came to work before his employees. At this moment, with the chilly echoing building just beginning to stir, a worried-looking clerical individual with nearly opaque glasses and wearing a tabby fur blazer and pointed yellow shoes waited at the reception counter, a claim check stub in his hand. Obviously, he had shown up to holiday greet a relative. Resurrection Day, the holiday on which the half-lifers were publicly honored, lay just around the corner. The rush would soon be beginning. "Yes, sir," Herbert said to him with an affable smile. "I'll take your stub personally." "It's an elderly lady," the customer said, "about 80, very small and wizened, my grandmother." "'Twill only be a moment." Herbert made his way back to the cold-pack bins to search out number 3054039B. When he located the correct party, he scrutinized the lading report attached. It gave only 15 days of half-life remaining. Not very much, he reflected. Automatically he pressed a portable protophazon amplifier into the transparent plastic hull of the casket, tuned it, listened at the proper frequency for indication of cephalic activity. Faintly from the speaker a voice said, "And then Tilly sprained her ankle, and we never thought it'd heal. She was so foolish about it, wanting to start walking immediately." Satisfied, he unplugged the amplifier and located a union man to perform the actual task of carting 3054039B to the consultation lounge, where the customer would be put in touch with the old lady. "You checked her out, did you?" the customer asked as he paid the post-creds due. "Personally," Herbert answered, "functioning perfectly." He kicked a series of switches, then stepped back. "Happy Resurrection Day, sir." "Thank you." The customer seated himself facing the casket, which steamed in its envelope of cold pack. He pressed an earphone against the side of his head and spoke firmly into the microphone. "Flora, dear, can you hear me? I think I can hear you already. Flora?" "When I pass," Herbert Schönheit von Vogelsang said to himself, "I think I'll will my heirs to revive me one day a century. That way I can observe the fate of all mankind." But that meant a rather high maintenance cost to the heirs, and he knew what that meant. Sooner or later they would rebel, have his body taken out of Coldpack and, God forbid, buried. "Burial is barbaric," Herbert muttered aloud, "remnant of the primitive origins of our culture." "Yes, sir," his secretary agreed at her typewriter. In the consultation lounge, several customers now communed with their half-lifer relations in rapt quiet, distributed at intervals, each with his separate casket. It was a tranquil sight, these faithfuls, coming as they did so regularly to pay homage. They brought messages, news of what took place in the outside world. They cheered the gloomy half-lifers in these intervals of cerebral activity, and they paid Herbert Schoenheit von Vogelsang. It was a profitable business operating a moratorium. "My dad seems a little frail," a young man said, catching Herbert's attention. "I wonder if you could take a moment of your time to check him over. I'd really appreciate it." "Certainly," Herbert said, accompanying the customer across the lounge to his deceased relative. The lading for this one showed only a few days remaining. That explained the vitiated quality of cerebration, but still, he turned up the gain of the protophazon amplifier, and the voice from the half-lifer became a trifle stronger in the earphone. "He's almost at an end," Herbert thought. It seemed obvious to him that the son did not want to see the lading, did not actually care to know that contact with his dad was diminishing, finally. So Herbert said nothing. He merely walked off, leaving the son to commune. Why tell him that this was probably the last time he would come here? He would find out soon enough in any case. A truck had now appeared at the loading platform at the rear of the moratorium. Two men hopped down from it, wearing familiar pale blue uniforms. Atlas, Interplan Van and Storage, Herbert perceived. Delivering another half-lifer who had just now passed, or here to pick up one which had expired. Leisurely he started in that direction to supervise. At that moment, however, his secretary called to him, "Herr Schoenheit von Vogelsang, sorry to break into your meditation, but a customer wishes you to assist in revving up his relative." Her voice took on special coloration as she said, "The customer is Mr. Glenn Runsider, all the way here from the North American Confederation." A tall, elderly man with large hands and a quick, sprightly stride came toward him. He wore a vari-colored Dacron wash-and-wear suit, knit cummerbund, and dip-dyed cheesecloth cravat. His head, massive like a tomcat's, thrust forward as he peered through slightly protruding, round and warm and highly alert eyes. Runsider kept on his face a professional expression of greeting, a fast attentiveness which fixed on Herbert, then almost at once strayed past him, as if Runsider had already fastened on to future matters. "How is Ella?" Runsider boomed, sounding as if he possessed a voice electronically augmented. "Ready to be cranked up for a talk? She's only 20. She ought to be in better shape than you or me." He chuckled. But it had an abstract quality. He always smiled, and he always chuckled. His voice always boomed, but inside he did not notice anyone, did not care. It was his body which smiled, nodded, and shook hands. Nothing touched his mind, which remained remote, aloof, but amiable. He propelled Herbert along with him, sweeping his way in great strides back into the chilled bins where the half-lifers, including his wife, lay. "You have not been here for some time, Mr. Runsider," Herbert pointed out. He could not recall the data on Mrs. Runsider's lading sheet, how much half-life she retained. Runsider, his wide, flat hand pressing against Herbert's back to urge him along, said, "This is a moment of importance, von Vogelsang. We, my associates and myself, are in a line of business that surpasses all rational understanding. I'm not at liberty to make disclosures at this time, but we consider matters at present to be ominous, but not, however, hopeless. Despair is not indicated, not by any means. Where's Ella?" He halted, glanced rapidly about. "I'll bring her from the bin to the consultation lounge for you," Herbert said. "Customers should not be here in the bins. Do you have your numbered claim check, Mr. Runsider?" "God, no," Runsider said. "I lost it months ago. But you know who my wife is. You can find her. Ella Runsider, about 20, brown hair and eyes." He looked around him impatiently. "Where did you put the lounge? It used to be located where I could find it." "Show Mr. Runsider to the consultation lounge," Herbert said to one of his employees, who had come meandering by, curious to see what the world-renowned owner of an anti-psi organization looked like. Peering into the lounge, Runsider said with aversion, "It's full. I can't talk to Ella in there." He strode after Herbert, who had made for the moratorium's files. Mr. von Vogelsang, he said, overtaking him, and once more dropping his big paw onto the man's shoulder. Herbert felt the weight of the hand, its persuading vigor. Isn't there a more private sanctum sanctorum for confidential communications? What I have to discuss with Ella, my wife, is not a matter which we at Cider Associates are ready at this time to reveal to the world. Caught up in the urgency of Cider's voice and presence, Herbert found himself readily mumbling, I can make Mrs. Cider available to you in one of our offices, sir. He wondered what had happened, what pressure had forced Cider out of his bailiwick to make this belated pilgrimage to the beloved Brethren Moratorium, to crank up, as Cider crudely phrased it, his half-lifer wife. A business crisis of some sort, he theorized. Ads over TV and in the homeopaths by the various anti-psi prudence establishments had shrilly squawked their harangues of late. Defend your privacy, the ads yammered on the hour from all media. Is a stranger tuning in on you? Are you really alone? That for the telepaths, and then the queasy worry about precogs. Are your actions being predicted by someone you never met? Someone you would not want to meet or invite into your home? Terminate anxiety. Contacting your nearest prudence organization will first tell you if, in fact, you are the victim of unauthorized intrusions, and then, on your instructions, nullify these intrusions at moderate cost to you. Prudence organizations. He liked the term. It had dignity, and it was accurate. He knew this from personal experience. 2 years ago, a telepath had infiltrated his moratorium staff for reasons which he had never discovered. To monitor confidences between half-lifers and their visitors, probably. Perhaps those of one specific half-lifer. Anyhow, a scout from one of the anti-psi organizations had picked up the telepathic field, and he had been notified. Upon his signing of a work contract, an anti-telepath had been dispatched, had installed himself on the moratorium premises. The telepath had not been located, but it had been nullified, exactly as the TV ads promised, and so, eventually, the defeated telepath had gone away. The moratorium was now psi-free, and, to be sure it stayed so, the anti-psi prudence organization surveyed his establishment routinely once a month. Thanks very much, Mr. Vogelsang, Cider said, following Herbert through an outer office in which clerks worked, to an empty inner room that smelled of drab and unnecessary micro-documents. Of course, Herbert thought musingly to himself, I took their word for it that a telepath got in here. They showed me a graph they had obtained, citing it as proof. Maybe they faked it, made up the graph in their own labs, and I took their word for it that the telepath left. He came, he left, and I paid 2,000 postcreds. Could the prudence organizations be, in fact, rackets? Claiming a need for their services when sometimes no need actually exists? Pondering this, he set off in the direction of the files once more. This time Cider did not follow him. Instead, he thrashed about noisily, making his big frame comfortable in terms of a meager chair. Cider sighed, and it seemed to Herbert suddenly that the massively built old man was tired, despite his customary show of energy. I guess when you get up into that bracket, Herbert decided, you have to act in a certain way. You have to appear more than a human with merely ordinary failings. Probably Cider's body contained a dozen artiforgs, artificial organs, grafted into place in his physiological apparatus as the genuine, original ones failed. Medical science, he conjectured, supplies the material groundwork, and out of the authority of his mind, Cider supplies the remainder. I wonder how old he is, he wondered. Impossible any more to tell by looks, especially after 90. Miss Beeson, he instructed his secretary, have Mrs. Ella Cider located and bring me the ident number. She's to be taken to office 2A. He seated himself across from her, busied himself with a pinch or two of Freiberg and Trier Prince's snuff, as Miss Beeson began the relatively simple job of tracking down Glenn Cider's wife. Chapter 2. The best way to ask for a beer is to sing out Ubik, made from select hops, choice water, slow-aged for perfect flavor. Ubik is the nation's #1 choice in beer, made only in Cleveland. Upright in her transparent casket, encased in an effluvium of icy mist, Ella Runsider lay with her eyes shut, her hands lifted permanently toward her impassive face. It had been 3 years since he had seen Ella, and of course she had not changed. She never would now, at least not in the outward physical way. But with each resuscitation into active half-life, into a return of cerebral activity, however short, Ella died somewhat. The remaining time left to her pulse phased out and ebbed. Knowledge of this underwrote his failure to rev her up more often. He rationalized this way, that it doomed her, that to activate her constituted a sin against her. As to her own stated wishes, before her death and in early half-life encounters, this had become handily nebulous in his mind. Anyway, he would know better, being 4 times as old as she. What had she wished? To continue to function with him as co-owner of Runsider Associates. Something vague on that order. Well, he had granted this wish. Now, for example, and 6 or 7 times in the past, he did consult her at each crisis of the organization. He was doing so at this moment. Damn this earphone arrangement, he grumbled as he fitted the plastic disc against the side of his head. And this microphone. All impediments to natural communication. He felt impatient and uncomfortable as he shifted about on the inadequate chair which Vogelsang, or whatever his name was, had provided him. He watched her rev back into sentience and wished she would hurry, and then, in panic, he thought, maybe she isn't going to make it. Maybe she's worn out and they didn't tell me. Or they don't know. Maybe, he thought, I ought to get that Vogelsang creature in here to explain. Maybe something terrible is wrong. Ella, pretty and light-skinned, her eyes in the days when they had been open had been bright and luminous blue. That would not again occur. He could talk to her and hear her answer. He could communicate with her, but he would never again see her with eyes opened, nor would her mouth move. She would not smile at his arrival. When he departed, she would not cry. Is this worth it, he asked himself. Is this better than the old way, the direct road from full life to the grave? I still do have her with me in a sense, he decided. The alternative is nothing. In the earphone, words, slow and uncertain, formed. Circular thoughts of no importance, fragments of the mysterious dream which she now dwelt in. How did it feel, he wondered, to be in half-life? He could never fathom it from what Ella had told him. The basis of it, the experience of it, couldn't really be transmitted. Gravity, she had told him once. It begins not to affect you, and you float more and more. When half-life is over, she had said, I think you float out of the system, out into the stars. But she did not know either. She only wondered and conjectured. She did not, however, seem afraid or unhappy. He felt glad of that. Hi, Ella, he said clumsily into the microphone. Oh, her answer came in his ear. She seemed startled, and yet, of course, her face remained stable. Nothing showed. He looked away. Hello, Glenn, she said, with a sort of childish wonder, surprised, taken aback to find him here. What? She hesitated. How much time has passed? Couple years, he said. Tell me what's going on. Oh, Christ, he said, everything's going to pieces, the whole organization. That's why I'm here. You wanted to be brought into major policy planning decisions, and God knows we need that now, a new policy, or anyhow a revamping of our scout structure. I was dreaming, Ella said. I saw a smoky red light, a horrible light, and yet I kept moving toward it. I couldn't stop. Yeah, Runsider said, nodding. The Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, tells about that. You remember reading that? The doctors made you read it when you were... He hesitated. Dying, he said then. The smoky red light is bad, isn't it? Ella said. Yeah, you want to avoid it. He cleared his throat. Listen, Ella, we've got problems. You feel up to hearing about it. I mean, I don't want to overtax you or anything. Just say if you're too tired, or if there's something else you want to hear about or discuss. It's so weird. I think I've been dreaming all this time, since you last talked to me. Is it really 2 years? Do you know, Glenn, what I think? I think that other people who are around me, we seem to be progressively growing together. A lot of my dreams aren't about me at all. Sometimes I'm a man, and sometimes a little boy. Sometimes I'm an old fat woman with varicose veins, and I'm in places I've never seen, doing things that make no sense. Well, like they say, you're heading for a new womb to be born out of, and that smoky red light, that's a bad womb. You don't want to go that way. That's a humiliating, low sort of womb. You're probably anticipating your next life, or whatever it is. He felt foolish talking like this. Normally, he had no theological convictions, but the half-life experience was real, and it had made theologians out of all of them. "Hey," he said, changing the subject, "let me tell you what's happened. What made me come here and bother you? S-do-melapone has dropped out of sight." A moment of silence, and then Ella laughed. What is an S-do-melapone? There can't be any such thing." The laugh, the unique and familiar warmth of it, made his spine tremble. He remembered that about her, even after so many years. He had not heard Ella's laugh in over a decade. "Maybe you've forgotten," he said. Ella said, "I haven't forgotten. I wouldn't forget an S-do-melapone. Is it like a hobbit?" "It's Raymond Hollis' top telepath. We've had at least one inertial sticking close to him ever since G.G. Ashwood first scouted him a year and a half ago. We never lose Melapone. We can't afford to. Melapone can, when necessary, generate twice the psi field of any other Hollis employee. And Melapone is only one of a whole string of Hollis people who've disappeared. Anyhow, disappeared as far as we're concerned. As far as all prudence organizations in the society can make out. So I thought, hell, I'll go ask Ella what's up and what we should do. Like you specified in your will, remember?" "I remember." But she sounded remote. "Step up your ads on TV. Warn people. Tell them..." Her voice trailed off into silence then. "This bores you," Runsider said gloomily. "No, She hesitated, and he felt her once more drift away. "Are they all telepaths?" she asked after an interval. "Telepaths and precogs, mostly. They're nowhere on Earth, I know that. We've got a dozen inactive inertials with nothing to do because the psis they've been nullifying aren't around. And what worries me even more, a lot more, is that requests for anti-psis have dropped, which you would expect given the fact that so many psis are missing. But I know they're on one single project. I believe. Anyhow, I'm sure of it. Somebody's hired the bunch of them, but only Hollis knows who it is or where it is, or what it's all about." He lapsed into brooding silence then. How would Ella be able to help him figure it out, he asked himself. Stuck here in this casket, frozen out of the world, she knew only what he told her. Yet he had always relied on her sagacity, that particular female form of it, a wisdom not based on knowledge or experience, but on something innate. He had not, during the period she had lived, been able to fathom it. He certainly could not do so now that she lay in chilled immobility. Other women he had known since her death, there had been several, had a little of it, trace amounts, perhaps, intimations of a greater potentiality which, in them, never emerged as it had in Ella. "Tell me," Ella said, "what this Melapone person is like." "A screwball." "Working for money, or out of conviction? I always feel wary about that, when they have that psi mystique, that sense of purpose and cosmic identity, like that awful Serapis had. Remember him?" "Serapis isn't around anymore. Hollis allegedly bumped him off because he connived to set up his own outfit in competition with Hollis. One of his precogs tipped Hollis off," he added. "Melapone is much tougher on us than Serapis was. When he's hot, it takes 3 inertials to balance his field, and there's no profit in that. We collect, or did collect, the same fee we get with 1 inertial, because the society has a rate schedule now which we're bound by." He liked the society less each year. It had become a chronic obsession with him, its uselessness, its cost, its vainglory. "As near as we can tell, Melapone is a money psi. Does that make you feel better? Is that less bad?" He waited, but heard no response from her. "Ella?" he said. Silence. Nervously, he said, "Hey, hello there, Ella. Can you hear me? Is something wrong?" "Oh, God," he thought, "she's gone." A pause, and then thoughts materialized in his right ear. "My name is Jory." Not Ella's thought, a different elan, more vital and yet clumsier, without her deft subtlety. "Get off the line," Runsider said in panic. "I was talking to my wife, Ella. Where'd you come from?" "I am Jory," the thoughts came, "and no one talks to me. I'd like to visit with you a while, mister, if that's okay with you. What's your name?" Stammering, Runsider said, "I want my wife, Mrs. Ella Runsider. I paid to talk to her, and that's who I want to talk to, not you." "I know Mrs. Runsider," the thoughts clanged in his ear, much stronger now. "She talks to me, but it isn't the same as somebody like you talking to me, somebody in the world. Mrs. Runsider is here where we are. It doesn't count because she doesn't know any more than we do. What year is it, mister? Did they send that big ship to Proxima? I'm very interested in that. Maybe you can tell me, and if you want I can tell Mrs. Runsider later on, okay?" Runsider popped the plug from his ear, hurriedly set down the earphone and the rest of the gadgetry. He left the stale, dust-saturated office and roamed about among the chilling caskets, row after row, all of them neatly arranged by number. Moratorium employees swam up before him and then vanished as he churned on, searching for the owner. "Is something the matter, Mr. Runsider?" the von Vogelsang person said, observing him as he floundered about. "Can I assist you?" "I've got something coming in over the wire," Runsider panted, halting. "Instead of Ella. Damn you guys and your shoddy business practices. This shouldn't happen. And what does it mean?" He followed after the moratorium owner, who had already started in the direction of Office 2A. "If I ran my business this way—" Did the individual identify himself? "Yeah, he called himself Jory." Frowning with obvious worry, von Vogelsang said, "That would be Jory Miller. I believe he's located next to your wife, in the bin." "But I can see it's Ella." "After prolonged proximity," von Vogelsang explained, "there is occasionally a mutual osmosis, a suffusion between the mentalities of half-lifers. Jory Miller's cephalic activity is particularly good. Your wife's is not. That makes for an unfortunately one-way passage of protophasons." "Can you correct it?" Runsider asked hoarsely. He found himself still spent, still panting and shaking. "Get that thing out of my wife's mind and get her back. That's your job." Von Vogelsang said in a stilted voice, "If this condition persists, your money will be returned to you." "Who cares about the money? Smirt the money!" They had reached Office 2A now. Runsider unsteadily reseated himself, his heart laboring so that he could hardly speak. "If you don't get this Jory person off the line," he half-gasped, half-snarled, "I'll sue you. I'll close down this place." Facing the casket, von Vogelsang pressed the audio outlet into his ear and spoke briskly into the microphone. "Phase out, Jory. That's a good boy." Glancing at Runsider, he said, "Jory passed at 15. That's why he has so much vitality. Actually, this has happened before. Jory has shown up several times where he shouldn't be." Once more into the microphone, he said, "This is very unfair of you, Jory. Mr. Runsider has come a long way to talk to his wife. Don't dim her signal, Jory. That's not nice." A pause as he listened to the earphone. "I know her signal is weak." Again he listened, solemn and frog-like, then removed the earphone and rose to his feet. "What did he say?" Runsider demanded. "Will he get out of there and let me talk to Ella?" Von Vogelsang said, "There's nothing Jory can do. Think of 2 AM radio transmitters, one close by but limited to only 500 watts of operating power, then another far off but on the same or nearly the same frequency and utilizing 5,000 watts. When night comes, and night, Runsider said, has come, at least for Ella, and maybe himself as well if Hollis is missing teeps, parakineticists, precogs, resurrectors and animators couldn't be found, He had not only lost Ella, he had lost her advice, Jory having supplanted her before she could give it. When we return her to the bin, Von Vogelsang was blabbing, we won't install her near Jory again. In fact, if you're agreeable as to paying the somewhat larger monthly fee, we can place her in a high-grade isolated chamber with walls coated and reinforced with Teflon 26 so as to inhibit hetero-psychic infusion from Jory or anybody else. Isn't it too late? Runsider said, surfacing momentarily from the depression into which this happening had dropped him. She may return once Jory phases out, plus anyone else who may have gotten into her because of her weakened state. She's accessible to almost anyone. Von Vogelsang chewed his lip, palpably pondering. She may not like being isolated, Mr. Runsider. We keep the containers, the caskets as they're called by the lay public, close together for a reason. Wandering through one another's mind gives those in half-life the only... Put her in solitary right now, Runsider broke in. Better she be isolated than not exist at all. She exists, Von Vogelsang corrected. She merely can't contact you. There's a difference, Runsider said. A metaphysical difference, which means nothing to me. I will put her in isolation, Von Vogelsang said, but I think you're right. It's too late. Jory has permeated her permanently, to some extent at least. I'm sorry, Runsider said harshly. So am I. Chapter 3. Instant Ubik has all the fresh flavor of just brewed drip coffee. Your husband will say, Christ, Sally, I used to think your coffee was only so-so, but now, wow, safe when taken as directed. Still in gay pinstripe, clown-style pajamas, Joe Chip hazily seated himself at his kitchen table, lit a cigarette, and, after inserting a dime, twiddled the dial of his recently rented pape machine. Having a hangover, he dialed off Interplan News, hovered momentarily at Domestic News, and then selected Gossip. Yes, sir, the pape machine said heartily. Gossip! Guess what Stanton Mick, the reclusive interplanetarily known speculator and financier, is up to at this very moment. Its works whizzed, and a scroll of printed matter crept from its slot. The ejected roll, a document in 4 colors, niftily incised with bold type, rolled across the surface of the neo-teak wood table and bounced to the floor. His head aching, Chip retrieved it, spread it out flat before him. Headline: Mick hits World Bank for $2 trillion. AP London. What could Stanton Mick, the reclusive interplanetarily known speculator and financier, be up to, the business community asked itself, as rumor leaked out of Whitehall that the dashing but peculiar industrial magnate who once offered to build free of charge a fleet by which Israel could colonize and make fertile otherwise desert areas of Mars, had asked for and may possibly receive a staggering and unprecedented loan of... This isn't gossip, Joe Chip said to the pape machine. This is speculation about fiscal transactions. Today I want to read about which TV star is sleeping with whose drug-addicted wife. He had, as usual, not slept well, at least in terms of REM, rapid eye movement sleep, and he had resisted taking a soporific because, very unfortunately, his weak supply of stimulants, provided him by the autonomic pharmacy of his Connapt building, had run out, due, admittedly, to his own oral greed, but nonetheless gone. By law, he could not approach the pharmacy for more until next Tuesday, 2 days away. 2 long days. The pape machine said, Set the dial for low gossip. He did so, and a second scroll, excreted by the pape machine without delay, emerged. He zoomed in on an excellent caricature drawing of Lola Hertzberg-Wright, licked his lips with satisfaction at the naughty exposure of her entire right ear, then feasted on the text. Accosted by a cut-purse in a fancy New York after-hours mowl the other night, Lola Hertzberg-Wright bounced a swift right jab off the chops of the do-batter, which sent him reeling onto the table where King Aegon Grote of Sweden and an unidentified miss with astonishingly large... The ring construct of his Connaught door jangled. Startled, Joe Chip glanced up, found his cigarette attempting to burn the formica surface of his neo-teak wood table, coped with that, then shuffled blearily to the speak tube mounted handily by the release bolt of the door. "Who is it?" he grumbled, checking with his wristwatch. He saw that 8 o'clock had not arrived. Probably the rent robot, he decided, or a creditor. He did not trigger off the release bolt of the door. An enthusiastic male voice from the door speaker exclaimed, "I know it's early, Joe, but I just hit town. G.G. Ashwood here. I've got a firm prospect that I snared in Topeka. I read this one is magnificent, and I want your confirmation before I lay the pitch in Runsider's lap. Anyhow, he's in Switzerland." Chip said, "I don't have my test equipment in the apt." "I'll shoot over to the shop and pick it up for you." "It's not at the shop," reluctantly he admitted. "It's in my car. I didn't get around to unloading it last night." In actuality, he had been too pizzled on Papa Putt to get the trunk of his hover car open. "Can't it wait until after 9?" he asked irritably. G.G. Ashwood's unstable, manic energy annoyed him even at noon. This at 7:40 struck him as downright impossible, worse even than a creditor. "Chip, dearie, this is a sweet number, a walking symposium of miracles that'll curl the needles of your gauges and, in addition, give new life to the firm, which it badly needs. And furthermore, it's an anti-what?" Joe Chip asked. "Telepath?" "I'll lay it on you right out in front," G.G. Ashwood declared. "I don't know." "Listen, Chip," Ashwood lowered his voice. "This is confidential, this particular one. I can't stand down here at the gate, gum flapping away out loud. Somebody might overhear. In fact, I'm already picking up the thoughts of some glunk in a ground-level apt. "Okay," Joe Chip said, resigned. Once started, G.G. Ashwood's relentless monologues couldn't be aborted anyhow. He might as well listen to it. "Give me 5 minutes to get dressed and find out if I've got any coffee left in the apt anywhere." He had a quasi-memory of shopping last night at the Connapt's supermarket. In particular, a memory of tearing out a green ration stamp, which could mean either coffee or tea or cigarettes or fancy imported snuff. "You'll like her," G.G. Ashwood stated energetically, "although, as often happens, she's the daughter of a her." In alarm, Joe Chip said, "My app's unfit to be seen. I'm behind in my payments to the building cleanup robots. They haven't been inside here in 2 weeks. "I'll ask her if she cares." "Don't ask her. I care. I'll test her out down at the shop on Runsider's time." "I read her mind, and she doesn't care." "How old is she?" Maybe, he thought, she's only a child. Quite a few new and potential inertials were children, having developed their ability in order to protect themselves against their psionic parents. "How old are you, dear?" G.G. Ashwood asked faintly, turning his head away to speak to the person with him. 19, he reported to Joe Chip. "Well, shut that." But now he had become curious. G.G. Ashwood's razzle-dazzle wound-up tightness usually manifested itself in conjunction with attractive women. Maybe this girl fell into that category. "Give me 15 minutes, he told G.G. If he worked fast and skulked about in a cleanup campaign, and if he missed both coffee and breakfast, he could probably effect a tidy apt by then. At least it seemed worth trying. He rang off, then searched in the cupboards of the kitchen for a broom, manual or self-powered, or vacuum cleaner, helium battery, or wall socket. Neither could be found. Evidently, he had never been issued any sort of cleaning equipment by the building's supply agency. Hell of a time, he thought, to find that out. And he had lived here 4 years. Picking up the vidphone, he dialed 214, the extension for the maintenance circuit of the building. "Listen," he said, when the homeostatic entity answered. "I'm now in a position to divert some of my funds in the direction of settling my bill vis-a-vis your cleanup robots. I'd like them up here right now to go over my apt. I'll pay the full and entire bill when they're finished." "Sir, you'll pay your full and entire bill before they start." By now he had his billfold in hand. From it he dumped his supply of magic credit keys, most of which by now had been voided. Probably in perpetuity, his relationship with money and the payment of pressing debts being such as it was. "I'll charge my overdue bill against my triangular magic key," he informed his nebulous antagonist. "That will transfer the obligation out of your jurisdiction. On your books it'll show as total restitution, plus fines, plus penalties. I'll charge those against my heart-shaped Mr. Chip. The Ferris and Brockman Retail Credit Auditing and Analysis Agency has published a special flyer on you. Our recept slot received it yesterday, and it remains fresh in our minds. Since July, you've dropped from a triple G status credit-wise to quadruple G. Our department, in fact this entire Connapt building, is now programmed against an extension of services and/or credit to such pathetic anomalies as yourself, sir. Regarding you, everything must hereafter be handled on a basic cash subfloor. In fact, you'll probably be on a basic cash subfloor for the rest of your life. In fact, he hung up, and abandoned the hope of enticing and/or threatening the clean-up robots into entering his muddled apt. Instead, he padded into the bedroom to dress. He could do that without assistance. After he had dressed in a sporty maroon wrapper, twinkle-toes, turned-up shoes, and a felt cap with a tassel, he poked about hopefully in the kitchen for some manifestation of coffee. None. He then focused on the living room and found, by the door leading to the bathroom, last night's great cape, every spotty blue yard of it, and a plastic bag which contained a half-pound can of authentic Kenya coffee, a great treat and one which only while pizzled would he have risen to, especially in view of his current abominable financial situation. Back in the kitchen, he fished in his various pockets for a dime, and, with it, started up the coffee pot. Sniffing the, to him, very unusual smell, he again consulted his watch, saw that 15 minutes had passed. He therefore vigorously strode to the apt door, turned the knob, and pulled on the release bolt. The door refused to open. It said, 5 cents, please. He searched his pockets. No more coins. Nothing. I'll pay you tomorrow, he told the door. Again he tried the knob. Again it remained locked tight. What I pay you, he informed it, is in the nature of a gratuity. I don't have to pay you. I think otherwise, the door said. Look in the purchase contract you signed when you bought this Connapt. In his desk drawer he found the contract. Since signing it, he had found it necessary to refer to the document many times. Sure enough, payment to his door for opening and shutting constituted a mandatory fee, not a tip. You discover I'm right, the door said. It sounded smug. From the drawer beside the sink, Joe Chip got a stainless steel knife. With it, he began systematically to unscrew the bolt assembly of his apt money-gulping door. I'll sue you, the door said as the first screw fell out. Joe Chip said, I've never been sued by a door, but I guess I can live through it. A knock sounded on the door. Hey, Joe, baby, it's me, Gigi Ashwood, and I've got her right here with me. Open up. Put a nickel in the slot for me, Joe said. The mechanism seems to be jammed on my side. A coin rattled down into the works of the door. It swung open, and there stood Gigi Ashwood with a brilliant look on his face. It pulsed with sly intensity, an erratic, gleaming triumph as he propelled the girl forward and into the apt. She stood for a moment, staring at Joe, obviously no more than 17, slim and copper-skinned, with large, dark eyes. My God, he thought she's beautiful. She wore an ersatz canvas work shirt and jeans, heavy boots caked with what appeared to be authentic mud. Her tangle of shiny hair was tied back and knotted with a red bandana. Her rolled-up sleeves showed tanned, competent arms. At her imitation leather belt she carried a knife, a field telephone unit, and an emergency pack of rations and water. On her bare, dark forearm he made out a tattoo, Caveat Emptor, it read. He wondered what that meant. This is Pat, Gigi Ashwood said, his arm with ostentatious familiarity around the girl's waist. Never mind her last name. Square and puffy like an overweight brick, wearing his usual mohair poncho, apricot-colored felt hat, argyle ski socks, and carpet slippers, he advanced toward Joe Chip, self-satisfaction smirking from every molecule in his body. He had found something of value here, and he meant to make the most of it. Pat, this is the company's highly skilled first-line electrical type tester. Coolly, the girl said to Joe Chip, Is it you that's electrical, or your tests? We trade off, Joe said. He felt from all around him the miasma of his uncleaned-up apt. It radiated a specter of debris and clutter, and he knew that Pat had already noticed. "Sit down," he said awkwardly. "Have a cup of actual coffee." "Such luxury," Pat said, seating herself at the kitchen table. Reflexively, she gathered the week's heap of papes into a neater pile. "How can you afford real coffee, Mr. Chip?" Gigi Ashwood said, "Joe gets paid a hell of a lot. The firm couldn't operate without him." Reaching out, he took a cigarette from the package lying on the table. "Put it back, Joe," Chip said. "I'm almost out, and I used up my last green ration stamp on the coffee." "I paid for the door," Gigi pointed out. He offered the pack to the girl. "Joe puts on an act. Pay no attention. Like, look how he keeps his place. Shows he's creative. All geniuses live like this. Where's your test equipment, Joe? We're wasting time." To the girl, Joe said, "You're dressed oddly." "I maintain the subsurface vid phone lines at the Topeka kibbutz," Pat said. "Only women can hold jobs involving manual labor at that particular kibbutz. That's why I applied there instead of the Wichita Falls kibbutz." Her black eyes blazed pridefully. Joe said, "That inscription on your arm, that tattoo, is that Hebrew?" "Latin." Her eyes veiled her amusement. "I've never seen an apt so cluttered with rubbish. Don't you have a mistress?" "These electrical expert types have no time for taradiddle," Gigi Ashwood said irritably. "Listen, Chip, this girl's parents work for Ray Hollis. If they knew she was here, they'd give her a frontal lobotomy." To the girl, Joe Chip said, "They don't know you have a counter-talent?" "No." She shook her head. "I didn't really understand it either until your scout sat down with me in the kibbutz cafeteria and told me. Maybe it's true." She shrugged. "Maybe not. He said you could show me objective proof of it with your testing battery." "How would you feel," he asked her, "if the tests show that you have it?" Reflecting, Pat said, "It seems so negative. I don't do anything. I don't move objects or turn stones into bread or give birth without impregnation or reverse the illness process in sick people or read minds or look into the future. Not even common talents like that. I just negate somebody else's ability. It seems," she gestured, "stultifying." "As a survival factor for the human race," Joe said, "it's as useful as the psi talents, especially for us norms. The anti-psi factor is a natural restoration of ecological balance. One insect learns to fly, so another learns to build a web to trap him. Is that the same as no flight? Clams developed hard shells to protect them. Therefore, birds learn to fly the clam up high in the air and drop him on a rock. In a sense, you're a life form preying on the psis, and the psis are life forms that prey on the norms. That makes you a friend of the norm class. Balance, the full circle, predator and prey. It appears to be an eternal system, and frankly, I can't see how it could be improved." "I might be considered a traitor," Pat said. "Does it bother you?" "It bothers me that people will feel hostile toward me. But I guess you can't live very long without arousing hostility. You can't please everybody because people want different things. Please one and you displease another." Joe said, "What is your anti-talent?" "It's hard to explain." "Like I say," Gigi Ashwood said, "it's unique. I've never heard of it before." "Which psi talent does it counteract?" Joe asked the girl. "Precog," Pat said, "I guess." She indicated Gigi Ashwood, whose smirk of enthusiasm had not dimmed. "Your scout, Mr. Ashwood, explained it to me. I knew I did something funny. I've always had these strange periods in my life, starting in my 6th year. I never told my parents because I sensed that it would displease them." "Are they precogs?" Joe asked. "Yes." "You're right. It would have displeased them. But if you used it around them, even once, they would have known." "Didn't they suspect? Didn't you interfere with their ability?" Pat said, She gestured. "I think I did interfere, but they didn't know it." Her face showed bewilderment. "Let me explain," Joe said, "how the anti-precog generally functions. Functions, in fact, in every case we know of. The precog sees a variety of futures, laid out side by side like cells in a beehive. For him, one has greater luminosity, and this he picks. Once he has picked it, the anti-precog can do nothing. The anti-precog has to be present when the precog is in the process of deciding, not after. The anti-precog makes all futures seem equally real to the precog. He aborts his talent to choose at all. A precog is instantly aware when an anti-precog is nearby because his entire relation to the future is altered. In the case of telepaths, a similar impairment, she goes back in time, G.G. Ashwood said. Joe stared at him. Back in time, G.G. repeated, savoring this. His eyes shot shafts of significance to every part of Joe Chip's kitchen. The precog affected by her still sees one predominant future. Like you said, the one luminous possibility. And he chooses it, and he's right. But why is it right? Why is it luminous? Because this girl, he shrugged in her direction, Pat controls the future. That one luminous possibility is luminous because she's gone into the past and changed it. By changing it, she changes the present, which includes the precog. He's affected without knowing it, and his talent seems to work, whereas it really doesn't. So that's one advantage of her anti-talent over other anti-precog talents. The other, and greater, is that she can cancel out the precog's decision after he's made it. She can enter the situation later on, and this problem has always hung us up, as you know. If we didn't get in there from the start, we couldn't do anything. In a way, we never could truly abort the precog ability as we've done with the others, right? Hasn't that been a weak link in our services? He eyed Joe Chip expectantly. Interesting, Joe said presently. Hell, interesting? G.G. Ashwood thrashed about indignantly. This is the greatest anti-talent to emerge thus far. In a low voice, Pat said, I don't go back in time. She raised her eyes, confronted Joe Chip half apologetically, half belligerently. I do something, but Mr. Ashwood has built it up all out of proportion to reality. I could read your mind, G.G. said to her, looking a little nettled. I know you can change the past. You've done it. Pat said, I can change the past, but I don't go into the past. I don't time travel as you want your tester to think. How do you change the past? Joe asked her. I think about it, one specific aspect of it, such as one incident or something somebody said, or a little thing that happened that I wish hadn't happened. The first time I did this, as a child, when she was 6 years old, G.G. broke in, living in Detroit, with her parents, of course. She broke a ceramic antique statue that her father treasured. Didn't your father foresee it? Joe asked her, with his precog ability. He foresaw it, Pat answered, and he punished me the week before I broke the statue. But he said it was inevitable. You know the precog talent. They can foresee, but they can't change anything. Then after the statue did break, after I broke it, I should say, I brooded about it, and I thought about that week before it broke when I didn't get any dessert at dinner and had to go to bed at 5 p.m. I thought, Christ, or whatever a kid says, isn't there some way these unfortunate events can be averted? My father's precog ability didn't seem very spectacular to me, since he couldn't alter events. I still feel that way, a sort of contempt. I spent a month trying to will the damn statue back into one piece. In my mind, I kept going back to before it broke, imagining what it had looked like, which was awful. And then one morning when I got up, I even dreamed about it at night. There it stood, as it used to be. Tensely, she leaned toward Joe Chip. She spoke in a sharp, determined voice. But neither of my parents noticed anything. It seemed perfectly normal to them that the statue was in one piece. They thought it had always been in one piece. I was the only one who remembered. She smiled, leaned back, took another of his cigarettes from the pack, and lit up. I'll go get my test equipment from the car, Joe said, starting toward the door. 5 cents, please, the door said as he seized its knob. Pay the door, Joe said to G.G. Ashwood. When he had lugged his armload of testing apparatus from the car to his apt, he told the firm scout to hit the road. What? G.G. said, astounded. But I found her. The bounty is mine. I spent almost 10 days tracing the field to her. Joe said to him, I can't test her with your field present, as you well know. Talent and anti-talent fields deform each other. If they didn't, we wouldn't be in this line of business. He held out his hand as G.G. got grumpily to his feet. And leave me a couple of nickels, so she and I can get out of here. I have change, Pat murmured, in my purse. You can measure the force he creates, G.G. said, by the loss within my field. I've seen you do it that way 100 times, Joe said briefly. This is different. I don't have any more nickels, Gigi said. I can't get out. Glancing at Joe, then at Gigi, Pat said, Have one of mine. She tossed Gigi a coin, which he caught, an expression of bewilderment on his face. The bewilderment then, by degrees, changed to a grieved sullenness. You sure shot me down, he said, as he deposited the nickel in the door slot. Both of you, he muttered as the door closed after him. I discovered her. This is really a cutthroat business when... His voice faded out as the door clamped shut. There was, then, silence. Presently, Pat said, When his enthusiasm goes, there isn't much left of him. He's okay, Joe said. He felt the usual feeling, guilt, but not very much. Anyhow, he did his part. Now it's your turn, Pat said, so to speak. May I take off my boots? Sure, he said. He began to set up his test equipment, checking the drums, the power supply. He started trial motions of each needle, releasing specific surges and recording their effect. A shower? She asked as she set her boots neatly out of the way. $1, he murmured. It cost $1. He glanced up at her and saw that she had begun unbuttoning her blouse. I don't have $1, he said. At the kibbutz, Pat said, everything is free. Free? He stared at her. That's not economically feasible. How can it operate on that basis for more than a month? She continued, unperturbedly unbuttoning her blouse. Our salaries are paid in, and we're credited with having done our job. The aggregate of our earnings underwrites the kibbutz as a whole. Actually, the Topeka kibbutz has shown a profit for several years. We as a group are putting in more than we're taking out. Having unbuttoned her blouse, she laid it over the back of her chair. Under the blue, coarse blouse, she wore nothing, and he perceived her breasts, hard and high, held well by the accurate muscles of her shoulders. Are you sure you want to do that, he said. Take off your clothes, I mean. Pat said, You don't remember? Remember what? My not taking off my clothes? In another present, you didn't like that very well, so I eradicated that. Hence this. She stood up lightly. What did I do? He asked cautiously. When you didn't take your clothes off, refuse to test you? You mumbled something about Mr. Ashwood having overrated my anti-talent. Joe said, I don't work that way. I don't do that. Here, bending, her breasts wagging forward, she rummaged in the pocket of her blouse, brought forth a folded sheet of paper which she handed him. From the previous present, the one I abolished. He read it, read his one-line evaluation at the end. Anti-psi field generated, inadequate, below standard throughout, no value against precog ratings now in existence. And then the code mark which he employed, a circle with a stroke dividing it. Do not hire, the symbol meant. And only he and Glenn Runsider knew that. Not even their scouts knew the meaning of the symbol, so Ashwood could not have told her. Silently, he returned the paper to her. She refolded it and returned it to her blouse pocket. Do you need to test me, she asked, after seeing that. I have a regular procedure, Joe said. 6 indices, which... Pat said, You're a little debt-stricken, ineffective bureaucrat who can't even scrape together enough coins to pay his door to let him out of his apt. Her tone, neutral but devastating, rebounded in his ears. He felt himself stiffen, wince, and violently flush. This is a bad spot right now, he said. I'll be back on my feet financially any day now. I can get a loan from the firm if necessary. He rose unsteadily, got 2 cups and 2 saucers, poured coffee from the coffee pot. Sugar, he said. Cream? Cream, Pat said, still standing barefoot without her blouse. He fumbled for the door handle of the refrigerator to get out a carton of milk. 10 cents, please, the refrigerator said. 5 cents for opening my door, 5 cents for the cream. It isn't cream, he said. It's plain milk. He continued to pluck futilely at the refrigerator door. Just this one time, he said to it. I swear to God I'll pay you back. Tonight. Here, Pat said. She slid a dime across the table toward him. She should have money, she said, as she watched him put the dime in the slot of the refrigerator. Your mistress? You really have failed, haven't you? I knew it when Mr. Ashwood... It isn't, he grated. Always like this. Do you want me to bail you out of your problems, Mr. Chip? Hands in the pockets of her jeans, she regarded him expressionlessly, no emotion clouding her face, only alertness. "You know I can. Sit down and write out your evaluation report on me. Forget the tests. My talent is unique anyway. You can't measure the field I produce. It's in the past, and you're testing me in the present, which simply takes place as an automatic consequence. Do you agree?" He said, "Let me see that evaluation sheet you have in your blouse. I want to look at it one more time before I decide." From her blouse, she once more brought forth the folded-up yellow sheet of paper. She calmly passed it across the table to him, and he reread it. "My writing," he said to himself. "Yes, it's true." He returned it to her, and from the collection of testing items took a fresh, clean sheet of the same familiar yellow paper. On it, he wrote her name, then spurious, extraordinarily high test results, and then at last his conclusions. His new conclusions: has unbelievable power, anti-psi field unique in scope, can probably negate any assembly of precogs imaginable. After that, he scratched a symbol, this time 2 crosses, both underlined. Pat, standing behind him, watched him write. He felt her breath on his neck. "What did the 2 underlined crosses mean?" she asked. "Hire her," Joe said, "at whatever cost required." "Thank you." She dug into her purse, brought out a handful of post-cred bills, selected one and presented it to him, a big one. "This will help you with expenses. I couldn't give it to you earlier, before you made your official evaluation of me. You would have canceled very nearly everything, and you would have gone to your grave thinking I had bribed you. Ultimately, you would have even decided that I had no counter-talent." She then unzipped her jeans and resumed her quick, furtive undressing. Joe Chip examined what he had written, not watching her. The underlined crosses did not symbolize what he had told her. They meant, "Watch this person. She is a hazard to the firm. She is dangerous." He signed the test paper, folded it, and passed it to her. She at once put it away in her purse. "When can I move my things in here?" she asked as she padded toward the bathroom. "I consider it mine as of now, since I've already paid you what must be virtually the entire month's rent." "Any time," he said. The bathroom said, 50 cents, please, before turning on the water." Pat padded back into the kitchen to reach into her purse. Chapter 4. Wild new Ubik salad dressing. Not Italian, not French, but an entirely new and different taste treat that's waking up the world. Wake up to Ubik and be wild, safe when taken as directed. Back in New York once more, his trip to the beloved Brethren Moratorium completed, Glenn Runsider landed via a silent and impressive all-electric hired limousine on the roof of the central installation of Runsider Associates. A descent chute dropped him speedily to his 5th-floor office. Presently, at 9:30 a.m. local time, he sat in the massive, old-fashioned, authentic walnut and leather swivel chair behind his desk, talking on the vidphone to his public relations department. "Tamish, I just now got back from Zurich. I conferred with Eller there." Runsider glared at his secretary, who had cautiously entered his personal, oversized office, shutting the door behind her. "What do you want, Mrs. Frick?" he asked her. Withered, timorous Mrs. Frick, her face dabbed with spots of artificial color to compensate for her general ancient grayness, made a gesture of disavowal. She had no choice but to bother him. "Okay, Mrs. Frick," he said patiently. "What is it?" "A new client, Mr. Runsider. I think you should see her." She both advanced toward him and retreated, a difficult maneuver which Mrs. Frick alone could carry off. It had taken her 10 decades of practice. "As soon as I'm off the phone," Runsider told her. Into the phone he said, "How often do our ads run on primetime TV planet-wide? Still once every 3rd hour?" "Not quite that, Mr. Runsider. Over the course of a full day, Prudence ads appear on an average of once every 3rd hour per UHF channel, but the cost of prime time, I want them to appear every hour," Runsider said. "Ella thinks that would be better." On the trip back to the Western Hemisphere, he had decided which of their ads he liked the most. "You know that recent Supreme Court ruling where a husband can legally murder his wife if he can prove she wouldn't under any circumstances give him a divorce?" "Yes, the so-called—" "I don't care what it's called. What matters is that we have a TV ad made up on that already. How does that ad go? I've been trying to remember it." Tamish said, There's this man, an ex-husband, being tried. First comes a shot of the jury, then the judge, then a pan-up on the prosecuting attorney cross-examining the ex-husband. He says, "It would seem, sir, that your wife—" "That's right," Unfettered said with satisfaction. He had originally helped write the ad. It was, in his opinion, another manifestation of the marvelous multifacetedness of his mind. "Is it not the assumption, however," Tamish said, "that the missing Psys are at work as a group for one of the larger investment houses? Seeing as how this is probably so, perhaps we should stress one of our business establishment commercials. Do you perhaps recall this one, Mr. Runsider? It shows a husband home from his job at the end of the day. He still has on his electric yellow cummerbund, petal skirt, knee-hugging hose, and military-style visored cap. He seats himself wearily on the living room couch, starts to take off one of his gauntlets, then hunches over, frowns, and says, 'Gosh, Jill, I wish I knew what's been wrong with me lately. Sometimes, with greater frequency almost every day, the least little remark at the office makes me think that, well, somebody's reading my mind.' And then she says, 'If you're worried about that, why don't we contact our nearest prudence organization? They'll lease us an inertial at prices easy on our budget, and then you'll feel like your old self again.' Then this great smile appears on his face, and he says, 'Why, this nagging feeling is already—' Again appearing in the doorway to Runsider's office, Mrs. Frick said, 'Please, Mr. Runsider?' Her glasses quivered. He nodded. 'I'll talk to you later, Tamish. Anyhow, get hold of the networks and start our material on the hour basis as I outlined.' He rang off, then regarded Mrs. Frick silently. 'I went all the way to Switzerland,' he said presently, 'and had Ella roused to get that information, that advice.' 'Mr. Runsider is free, Miss Wirt.' His secretary tottered to one side, and a plump woman rolled into the office. Her head, like a basketball, bobbed up and down. Her great round body propelled itself toward a chair, and there, at once, she seated herself, narrow legs dangling. She wore an unfashionable spider-silk coat, looking like some amiable bug wound up in a cocoon not spun by itself. She looked encased. However, she smiled. She seemed fully at ease. In her late 40s, Runsider decided, past any period in which she might have had a good figure. "Ah, Miss Wirt," he said, "I can't give you too much time. Maybe you should get to the point. What's the problem?" In a mellow, merry, incongruous voice, Miss Wirt said, "We're having a little trouble with telepaths. We think so, but we're not sure. We maintain a telepath of our own, one we know about and who's supposed to circulate among our employees. If he comes across any Psys, telepaths, or precogs, any kind, he's supposed to report to—" She eyed Runsider brightly. "To my principal. Late last week, he made such a report. We have an evaluation done by a private firm on the capacities of the various prudence agencies. Yours is rated foremost." "I know that," Runsider said. He had seen the evaluation, as a matter of fact. As yet, however, it had brought him little, if any, greater business. But now this. "How many telepaths," he said, "did your man pick up? More than one?" "Two, at least." "Possibly more?" "Possibly," Miss Wirt nodded. "Here is how we operate," Runsider said. "First, we measure the psi field objectively so we can tell what we're dealing with. That generally takes from 1 week to 10 days, depending on—" Miss Wirt interrupted. "My employer wants you to move in your inertials right away, without the time-consuming and expensive formality of making tests." "We wouldn't know how many inertials to bring in, or what kind, or where to station them. Diffusing a psi operation has to be done on a systematic basis. We can't wave a magic wand or spray toxic fumes into corners. We have to balance Hollis's people individual by individual, and anti-talent for every talent. If Hollis has gotten into your operation, he's done it the same way, psi by psi. One gets into the personnel department, hires another. That person sets up a department or takes charge of a department and requisitions a couple more. Sometimes it takes them months. We can't undo in 24 hours what they've constructed over a long period of time. Big-time psi activity is like a mosaic. They can't afford to be impatient, and neither can we." "My employer," Miss Wirt said cheerfully, "is impatient." "I'll talk to him." Runsider reached for the vidphone. "Who is he, and what's his number?" "You'll deal through me." "Maybe I won't deal at all. Why won't you tell me who you represent?" He pressed a covert button mounted under the rim of his desk. It would bring his resident telepath, Nina Freed, into the next office, where she could monitor Miss Wirt's thought processes. I can't work with these people, he said to himself, if I don't know who they are. For all I know, Ray Hollis is trying to hire me. You're hidebound, Miss Wirt said. All we're asking for is speed, and we're only asking for that because we have to have it. I can tell you this much. Our operation, which they've infested, isn't on Earth. From the standpoint of potential yield, as well as from an investment standpoint, it's our primary project. My principal has put all his negotiable assets into it. Nobody is supposed to know about it. The greatest shock to us in finding telepaths on the site... Excuse me, Runsider said. He rose, walked to the office door. I'll find out how many people we have about the place who are available for use in this connection. Shutting his office door behind him, he looked into each of the adjoining offices until he spied Nina Freed. She sat alone in a minor side room, smoking a cigarette and concentrating. Find out who she represents, he said to her, and then find out how high they'll go. We've got 38 idle inertials, he reflected. Maybe we can dump all of them, or most of them, into this. I may finally have found where Hollis's smart-ass talents have sneaked off to. The whole goddamn bunch of them. He returned to his own office, reseated himself behind his desk. If telepaths have gotten into your operation, he said to Miss Wirt, his hands folded before him, then you have to face up to and accept the realization that the operation per se is no longer secret, independent of any specific technical info they've picked up. So why not tell me what the project is? Hesitating, Miss Wirt said, I don't know what the project is. Or where it is? No, she shook her head. Runsider said, Do you know who your employer is? I work for a subsidiary firm which he financially controls. I know who my immediate employer is. That's a Mr. Shepard Howard, but I've never been told whom Mr. Howard represents. If we supply you with the inertials you need, will we know where they are being sent? Probably not. Suppose we never get them back. Why wouldn't you get them back after they've decontaminated our operation? Hollis's men, Runsider said, have been known to kill inertials sent out to negate them. It's my responsibility to see that my people are protected. I can't do that if I don't know where they are. The concealed micro speaker in his left ear buzzed, and he heard the faint, measured voice of Nina Freed, audible to him alone. Miss Wirt represents Stanton Mick. She is his confidential assistant. There is no one named Shepard Howard. The project under discussion exists primarily on Luna. It has to do with Tech Prize, mixed research facilities, the controlling stock of which Miss Wirt keeps in her name. She does not know any technical details. No scientific evaluations or memos or progress reports are ever made available to her by Mr. Mick, and she resents this enormously. From Mick's staff, however, she has picked up a general idea of the nature of the project. Assuming that our second-hand knowledge is accurate, the lunar project involves a radical, new, low-cost interstellar drive system, approaching the velocity of light, which could be leased to every moderately affluent political or ethnological group. Mick's idea seems to be that the drive system will make colonization feasible on a mass basic understructure, and hence no longer a monopoly of specific governments. Nina Freed clicked off, and Runsider leaned back in his leather and walnut swivel chair to ponder. What are you thinking? Miss Wirt asked brightly. I'm wondering, Runsider said, if you can afford our services. Since I have no test data to go on, I can only estimate how many inertials you'll need, but it may run as high as 40. He said this knowing that Stanton Mick could afford or could figure out how to get someone else to underwrite an unlimited number of inertials. 40, Miss Wirt echoed. That is quite a few. The more we make use of, the sooner we can get the job done. Since you're in a hurry, we'll move them all in at one time. If you are authorized to sign a work contract in the name of your employer, he pointed a steady, unyielding finger at her. She did not blink. And you can come up with a retainer now. We could probably accomplish this within 72 hours. He eyed her, then waiting. The micro-speaker in his ear rasped. As owner of Tech Prize, she is fully bonded. She can legally obligate her firm up to and including its total worth. Right now, she is calculating how much this would be if converted on today's market. A pause. Several billion postcreds, she has decided, but she doesn't want to do this. She doesn't like the idea of committing herself to both a contract and retainer. She would prefer to have Mick's attorneys do that, even if it means several days' delay. But they're in a hurry, Runsider reflected, or so they say. The microspeaker said, she has an intuition that you know or have guessed whom she represents, and she's afraid you'll up your fee accordingly. Mick knows his reputation. He considers himself the world's greatest mark, so he negotiates in this manner, through someone or some firm as a front. On the other hand, they want as many inertials as they can get, and they're resigned to that being enormously expensive. 40 inertials, Runsider said idly. He scratched with his pen at a small sheet of blank paper on his desk for just such purposes. Let's see, 6 times 50 times 3 times 40. Miss Wirt, still smiling her glazed, happy smile, waited with visible tension. I wonder, he murmured, who paid Hollis to put his employees in the middle of your project? That doesn't really matter, does it, Miss Wirt said. What matters is that they're there. Runsider said, sometimes one never finds out. But, as you say, it's the same as when ants find their way into your kitchen. You don't ask why they're there. You just begin the job of getting them back out. He had arrived at a cost figure. It was enormous. I'll have to think it over, Miss Wirt said. She raised her eyes from the shocking sight of his estimate and half rose to her feet. Is there somewhere an office where I can be alone and possibly phone Mr. Howard? Runsider, also rising, said, it's rare for any prudence organization to have that many inertials available at one time. If you wait, the situation will change, so if you want them, you'd better act. And you think it would really take that many inertials? Taking Miss Wirt by the arm, he led her from his office and down the hall to the firm's map room. This shows, he told her, the location of our inertials plus the inertials of other prudence organizations. In addition to that, it shows, or tries to show, the location of all of Hollis's size. He systematically counted the psi ident flags, which one by one had been removed from the map. He wound up holding the final one, that of S. Do Melipone. I know now where they are, he said to Miss Wirt, who had lost her mechanical smile, as she comprehended the significance of the unpositioned ident flags. Taking hold of her damp hand, he deposited Melipone's flag among her damp fingers and closed them around it. You can stay here and meditate, he said. There's a vidphone over there, he pointed. No one will bother you. I'll be in my office. He left the map room thinking, I really don't know that this is where they are, all those missing psis, but it's possible, and Stanton Mick had waived the routine procedure of making an objective test. Therefore, if he wound up hiring inertials which he did not need, it would be his own fault. Legalistically speaking, Runsider Associates was required to notify the society that some of the missing psis, if not all, had been found, but he had 5 days in which to file the notification, and he decided to wait until the last day. This kind of business opportunity, he reflected, happens once in a lifetime. Mrs. Frick, he said, entering her outer office, type up a work contract specifying 40... He broke off. Across the room sat 2 persons. The man, Joe Chip, looked haggard and hungover and more than usually glum, looked, in fact, about as always, the glumness accepted. But beside him lounged a long-legged girl with brilliant, tumbling black hair and eyes. Her intense distilled beauty illuminated that part of the room, igniting it with heavy, sullen fire. It was, he thought, as if the girl resisted being attractive, disliked the smoothness of her skin and the sensual, swollen, dark quality of her lips. She looks, he thought, as if she just now got out of bed, still disordered, resentful of the day, in fact, of every day. Walking over to the 2 of them, Runsider said, I gather Gigi is back from Topeka? This is Pat, Joe Chip said. No last name. He indicated Runsider, then sighed. He had a peculiar defeated quality hanging over him, and yet, underneath, he did not seem to have given up. A vague and ragged hint of vitality lurked behind the resignation. It seemed to Runsider that Joe most nearly could be accused of feigning spiritual downfall. The real article, however, was not there. Anti-what? Runsider asked the girl, who still sat sprawling in her chair, legs extended. The girl murmured, Anti-ketogenesis. What's that mean? The prevention of ketosis, the girl said remotely, as by the administration of glucose. To Joe, Runsider said, Explain. Give Mr. Runsider your test sheet, Joe said to the girl. Sitting up, the girl reached for her purse, rummaged, then produced one of Joe's wrinkled yellow score sheets, which she unfolded, glanced at, and passed to Runsider. Amazing score, Runsider said. Is she really this good? He asked Joe. And then he saw the two underlined crosses, the graphic symbol of indictment, of, in fact, treachery. She's the best so far, Joe said. Come into my office, Runsider said to the girl. He led the way, and behind them, the two of them followed. Fat Miss Wirt, all at once, breathless, her eyes rolling, appeared. I phoned Mr. Howard, she informed Runsider. He has now given me my instructions. She thereupon perceived Joe Chip and the girl named Pat. For an instant she hesitated, then plunged on. Mr. Howard would like the formal arrangements made right away. So may we go ahead now? I've already acquainted you with the urgency, the time factor. She smiled her glassy, determined smile. Do you two mind waiting? She asked them. My business with Mr. Runsider is of a priority nature. Glancing at her, Pat laughed, a low, throaty laugh of contempt. You'll have to wait, Miss Wirt, Runsider said. He felt afraid. He looked at Pat, then at Joe, and his fear quickened. Sit down, Miss Wirt, he said to her, and indicated one of the outer office chairs. Miss Wirt said, I can tell you exactly, Mr. Runsider, how many inertials we intend to take. Mr. Howard feels he can make an adequate determination of our needs, of our problem. How many? Runsider asked. 11, Miss Wirt said. End of side 1. To continue, turn the cassette over.